I bought a quiet life and got a verdict instead. The morning I hung the keys by my cabin door, my daughter-in-law called to announce her plan like a weather report I didn't get to change. "My parents are moving into your place. If you don't like it, go back to the city." The sentence didn't shout, it carved. In that moment, I learned how family can turn your refuge into an asset, your boundaries into an inconvenience, and your competence into a narrative to be managed. What followed wasn't a fight in the woods, it was a war waged on paper. Locks, logs, and lawful lines drawn so I wouldn't lose the life I'd waited 40 years to start. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back. Be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. The keys were warm from my palm by the time the gravel road narrowed to a tunnel of fir and cedar. I killed the engine and listened the way I used to before stepping onto a line. No hurry, just a practice check of what could bite. Wind moved through the crowns and slid down in a hush. Far off, a loon sent up 3 notes. I had closed that morning in town, signed and initialed until my name looked like it belonged to somebody else. Paper turned into deed, years turned into boards, and a triangle of glass facing the tree line. Greenville, Maine had been a dot on a map. Today, it was a full stop. The cedar A-frame sat where the forest loosened its grip enough to show a ribbon of moosehead through the trunks. Inside smelled like cedar shavings and old smoke. I opened the windows a hand's width and propped the door with my toolbox, letting the cold roll over my boots. The place was simple. Great room under exposed rafters, pocket kitchen, narrow loft. I unboxed tools with the same order that kept me alive 38 years up poles and in storms. Hammer, linesman pliers, voltage tester, torque wrench, each on its pegboard hook until the wall looked like a diagram. I set a long table by the east window and placed my grid notebook at center, date at the top, temperature from the truck's dash, wind by the fir behind the outhouse. I made columns for fuel, water, filters, roof, and taped a plastic envelope to the back cover for receipts. If I could write it down, I could stand by it. From a box marked Keep, I pulled the photo of Elaine in her red raincoat on the pier in Rockland, the year the hurricane turned north at the last minute. I set it on the mantel and sat with the space it opened. Grief doesn't go, it learns your route. I brewed a French press, rinsed the mug with hot water first like she used to, and carried it to the porch. Bare claw marks scored an old white pine 10 yards off the deck, silvered, not fresh. Last fall by the look of it. Information, not alarm. I drove to the Warden Service substation. A clerk in a ball cap slid a bear-safe flyer across the counter and added a county radon pamphlet. Springs when they're hungry. "Folks test older cabins every few years," she said. "Welcome to Greenville." "Copy that," I told her. Trying to do it right. Late afternoon came with that rinsed look you get after snow retreats. I tuned the AM to marine weather and let the cadence run. Winds variable 5 to 10, seas light chop. I set the coffee maker where the first sun would find it and aligned it with the counter's edge until the line felt true. Small squares of control add up to something like peace. I walked the perimeter with a pencil behind my ear and the notebook in my pocket. The drive had 2 frost heaves that would need fill. A shingle near the ridge had lifted a thumb's width. The porch rail bowed an inch shy of plumb. In the birches, 2 deer watched from the deep shade. Back inside, I labeled shelves, hardware, solvents, tarps. I numbered the spare keys and put the lock's user manual in a folder titled Access Log, then set that in the desk's top drawer. I pinned a topo map to the wall and traced property lines with a yellow highlighter circling the brook in the northwest corner. That thread of water would matter in spring runoff. As dusk moved in, I called my son and kept it simple. Made it north. "Place is sound," I said. Good, Jay answered. Brooke says send pictures. Tomorrow, I told him. You good out there by yourself? He asked. I'm where I need to be, I said, and let the call end. I ate a sandwich at the counter, then wrote the first entry like a man putting his name on new work. April, clear, 38 degrees, wind west-northwest. Notes: bear sign old, shingle lift at ridge, porch rail to shim. AM pulls fine. I tucked the Bear Safe flyer and radon pamphlet in the notebook's envelope and closed the cover. Night arrived as a steady fact. The trees went from green to black cutouts, and the glass held a faint version of my face, older than the one I carry in my head. The cabin ticked as it learned me and I learned it. This quiet wasn't empty. It had weight, like a line humming right where it should. I breathed with it, slow and clean, and felt the years of sirens and generators slide off my shoulders like a wet coat. Before bed, I stepped onto the porch once more. The loon threw its call across the dark, and in the pause afterward, I could hear water working under ice beyond the trees. I locked the door, checked the deadbolt once, then again out of habit, and wrote a final line in the notebook. Quiet is order until it isn't. For now. 2 days after I unpacked the last box, the phone rang while frost still stitched the shaded grass. I knew the cadence of certain kinds of calls. I could hear the decision already made on the other end before I lifted the screen. Brooke didn't waste greetings. We've talked it through. My parents will move into your cabin for a bit. If you're not comfortable, you can come back to Portland for a few weeks. I let the silence sit long enough to cool it. The woods have rules, I said. I'll make it safe. I set the phone on the table and opened the grid notebook. Time, summary, no adjectives. In the margin, problem is not beds, problem is domicile. If you can name what's being claimed, you can set the right breaker. I built a checklist the way I'd wire a panel, one circuit at a time. First, call the main warden service for a Bear Safe site review. Second, book a radon test using closed house protocol, window shut, timed canisters, occupancy suspended. Third, schedule a septic load and pressure test. The tank was sized for me, not a second household. Each item carried proof, not opinions, just procedures. The warden service picked up on the second ring. Ranger Grant Sawyer could come Friday at 10 and would email a PDF checklist. I printed it and slid it into a sleeve labeled Warden Site Review. The radon company explained the conditions and added bold text in the confirmation. No occupancy during testing. The septic outfit booked an early slot and sent a work order with the same warning. Access control came next. I reset the smart lock's master code, created a guest code that would activate for exactly 1 afternoon, and turned on email alerts for every open and close. I tested the bolt twice, then opened a fresh folder labeled Guest and slid a 2-page agreement inside. Plain English, safety compliance, defined nights, no address registration, liability, a modest cost recovery fee to cover testing, signatures, kindness needs rules. I typed the sentence at the top as a reminder to myself. I called Jay to say we'd need signatures if anyone stayed. He exhaled into the phone. Paperwork for family? Really? Liability, wildlife, and septic capacity aren't opinions, I said. Read it. We can meet in town. He muttered that he would and hung up. I logged the call without commentary. Records outlast moods. I cleared the long table and staged the proofs. Warden email, radon confirmation, septic work order. I taped the testing schedule to the fridge and marked the wall calendar in orange. No occupancy. Tests. I printed a door notice in black block letters. Testing in progress. Do not enter. Contact owner. People act differently in the light. Outside, the wind ran a sharper saw through the trees. I walked the drive and flagged the frost heaves with survey tape so the septic truck wouldn't bottom out. Back inside, the label printer spit neat thermal strips. Fuel, filters, roof, access log. It slows the hands so the head can think. I phoned Caroline Holt's office and booked an elder law consult for the following week. Revocable trust, independent control, restrictions on third-party address use, I said. The receptionist gave me a list of documents to bring: deed, insurance, beneficiary forms. I opened the desk drawer and started a neat pile. Late afternoon, I ran a rehearsal. If Brooke and her parents arrived during work, I'd meet them in town, show the documents, and offer 3 alternatives: a short-term lakeside rental, a weekly rate hotel, or waiting until tests cleared. What I wouldn't do: allow address registration, hand over keys, let polite words bulldoze boundaries. The difference between hospitality and surrender is a signature line. The cabin settled. I thumbed the edge of the guest agreement until the paper felt familiar. Most fights I've seen weren't won by louder voices, they were won by better paperwork. Storm logs taught me that. Chaos attracts claims. Ink keeps shape. Dusk put a thin band of orange over the dark furs. My name on the deed didn't make the place mine as much as these systems did. The map on the wall, the codes, the calendar with its bright block of number. Ownership lives in the upkeep. I set my phone to charge overnight. Before bed, I wrote a clean recap in the notebook. Brooke called, plans to move parents here. Responded that woods have rules, actions, warden review Friday, 10 o'clock, radon window Saturday, closed house, septic load test scheduled, access controls updated, guest agreement prepared. Caroline Holt, consult set. Next line, meet in town only. I set the folder marked guest by the front door beside the printed sign. When the house went dark, the calendar square glowed faintly where the hall light touched it. I pictured the radon canister ticking its quiet count, the septic truck rumbling in and out, Ranger Sawyer pointing to claw marks and food attractants for the doorbell camera. None of it was aggression. It was a boundary built from ordinary rules. Tomorrow I'd stack firewood and keep my phone charged. The woods had their rules. Now my family did too. At dawn, the air felt metallic. I taped the testing in progress sign to the front door, set the folder labeled guest on the hall table, and put coffee on. The grid notebook waited open for timestamps. The septic truck eased into the clearing and stopped at the cones over the frost heaves. The driver climbed down and lifted the hatch to expose the tank lid. The radon tech arrived next with a hard case and 2 canisters he treated like instruments. He showed me the closed house protocol and laid a finger on the line that read no occupancy during testing. I initialed both copies and kept one. Ranger Grant Sawyer pulled in last, green truck with the warden seal catching the early light. He shook my hand, said he'd mark attractants, and walked me to the old white pine. With a gloved knuckle, he traced the silvered claw marks and said they were from last season. Plain, steady, the way people talk when they assume a camera might be watching. That's when the white Subaru Forester nosed around the bend and idled at the cones. Brooke's profile tightened over the wheel. Fred and Helen sat in the back. The door sign moved once. I walked down the drive and stopped well short of the bumper. I told them we were mid-tests and nobody could be inside the cabin until they were complete. Brooke cracked her window and glanced at the trucks. How convenient. Fred asked if radon was dangerous. Ranger Sawyer answered before I could, explaining it the way he would at a town meeting. Helen's hand rose to her collarbone, then settled. I just don't want trouble or headlines. We'll do what's safe. The doorbell camera would later show his briefing, the checklist, the arc of his hat brim moving from pine to trash to porch. I logged the minute in the notebook. No adjectives, just who was present and what was said. I suggested we meet in town while the crews worked, said the timberline would be easier for a calm conversation. Meet me in town, we'll keep it civil. Brooke took a photo of the sign and another of the septic truck, squared them on her phone, and nodded. The Forester reversed and nosed back onto the road, luggage jostling in the rear window. I drove in and parked where I could see the cafe door. Inside, room smelled like sun-warmed boards. I chose the table under a camera dome, set the guest folder on the wood, ordered coffee, and spread the confirmation so each masthead showed. When the bell over the door rang, I closed the notebook but kept a finger as a marker. Brooke and Jay came in with Fred and Helen a step behind. Brooke stayed standing, palms on the chair back. I spoke first. I laid out the guest agreement, safety compliance, defined dates, no address registration, a modest fee to cover testing. I added a sheet with 3 alternatives and phone numbers for a lakeside rental, a weekly rate hotel, and waiting until tests cleared. These are procedures, not opinions. It's about safety, not barriers. Brooke's mouth went thin. Family doesn't sign contracts and pay fees. Jay added, "You're making this difficult." I let the words settle and explained that the cabin and its systems were sized for one, that paperwork matches needs to facts, that we draw lines so nothing breaks. Fred's eyes drifted toward the camera dome. Helen asked what the fee covered, and I told her exactly. The radon test and septic load test, both scheduled before any guest discussion. The driver's work order lay open with the phrases she needed to see. She read until her shoulders loosened a fraction. Brooke slid the folder back across the table with 2 fingers. "We'll manage." I stood, thanked the barista, and put each paper away like a tool after a climb. In the truck, I opened the notebook and wrote, "Timberline, 40 minutes, all present, proposal made, alternatives offered, no agreement." I noted the camera above the register. Records outlast moods. They also cool hot tempers by giving facts a spine. On the way back, the road felt narrower, though the trees hadn't moved. Diesel hung low over the clearing when I pulled in. The septic crew gave me a thumbs up and a return time. The radon tech placed his canisters and sealed the door as if tucking a patient into a machine. Ranger Sawyer finished his checklist and handed me a copy. "Call if you need anything," he said. I folded the paper and looked at the sign on the door. Paper is quiet, but it holds. I set the guest folder back on the table and poured the coffee I'd left. The house made those small settling ticks again. In the stillness, the day took a shape. 2 plans had collided and only one had a schedule. The next move wouldn't come with trucks and forms. It would try to make me the story instead of the facts. I wrote that sentence down so I would remember it when it arrived. By late afternoon, the wind had a rasp to it, pushing the testing sign so it clicked against the doorframe. I made tea, opened my laptop, and saw the post before the kettle settled. The Greenville Neighbors banner framed Brooke's name and a tightly cropped photo of the septic truck. The caption called it a heartbreaking welcome for elders. Then a second image showed my testing in progress notice without the line that explained why. I read it twice and kept my hands still. I took screenshots with timestamps and dropped them into a folder named 04 Social. Then I pulled the doorbell clip where Ranger Sawyer stood under the pine and gave his plain language briefing about bears, trash, and the testing window. The audio was clean, you could hear the paper of his checklist. Captions weren't necessary. I opened the grid notebook and wrote the post's URL, slug, time, and a 1-line summary. Narrative omits radon/septic requirements and warden visit. I don't mind criticism. I mind holes that swallow context. The outline of my reply formed before my hands moved. Documents first, no adjectives, and an invitation in public so neighbors could see the shape of the thing. My comment was 4 sentences. Appreciate everyone's concern. For clarity, here are the official documents for scheduled safety testing that required the house to be empty. I attached PDFs, the warden site review checklist, the radon booking with no occupancy in bold, and the septic work order with the same phrase underlined. I've also registered a free bear-safe session in my yard next week for anyone curious about living with the woods. You're welcome. The refresh icon spun. A few neighbors reacted. A retired nurse asked whether radon testing was common. I answered plainly and pasted the county pamphlet link. Another local said the warden told him the same rules last spring. I let those comments stand as the last notes. Jay's text arrived like a pebble against glass. "You're making us look bad." I wrote the words into the notebook and replied with a measured line. I'm posting documents, not opinions. Testing protects everyone. Then I turned the phone face down and listened to the cabin breathe. Work keeps the mind steady. I called Caroline Holt's office and took the first available slot. The intake checklist hit my inbox before we hung up. I printed it and started a trust folder with the deed copy, insurance declarations, and a sticky note list of beneficiaries to update. Next, I scheduled a cognitive evaluation with Dr. Neha Patel. I requested a formal letter and testing results suitable for legal records, and the receptionist read back the date to be sure. I wrote it on the wall calendar and in the notebook in the same ink I use for weather, just a second plank in the same floor. Curiosity and caution pushed me to call Kennebec Mutual Credit Union to ask about their general process for selling delinquent consumer debt. I gave no names. The rep explained that portfolios move quarterly and that privacy laws kept everything abstract until an account was actually sold. I wrote, "Monitor, do not act, and underlined it once. Because I refused to confuse boundaries with meanness, I sent Ranger Sawyer an email registering a bear-safe community session at my place the following Thursday. He replied with a confirmation and a link to the town bulletin board. I posted that link under my earlier comment. I also saved an offline copy of each file and printed the first page with the timestamp in the footer, a habit from storm seasons when internet dropped and paper carried the weight of proof. Always. I also called the Silver Birch Conservancy and reserved 2 slots on a gentle interpretive walk for Saturday afternoon. The coordinator said the trail skirted beaver ponds and a patch of old hemlock. It sounded like a patient introduction to this part of Maine. I drafted a brief text to Brooke offering those spots to her parents, and I meant it. Most fear is a lack of translation. Before shutting down, I assembled the day's artifacts, screenshots labeled 2-minute, PDFs clipped with paper tabs, emails saved as print to PDF in a folder named 04 Documents. I slid a duplicate set into the physical binder behind a new divider. I wrote one last line under the day's log. When stories get loud, make the paper louder. The testing sign tapped the jam twice more in a gust, then went quiet. In the kitchen light, the tea looked like amber. I pictured next Thursday's semicircle of lawn chairs and Ranger Sawyer's checklist while a few neighbors asked practical questions. I hoped Fred and Helen would take the conservancy slots and hear the woods explained in a human voice. Hope doesn't replace boundaries, but it can sit beside them without picking a fight. When I killed the lamp, the router's tiny green blink was the only moving thing in the room. I set my watch on the notebook and slept the way you do after a storm. Tired, aware, and ready to write it all down in the morning. If you're still watching, please comment number 1 below to let me know you agree. Now let's move on. The public story is about to be proven. The engine announced itself before I saw the car, fast up the last bend, a gear held too long, gravel clicking off the undercarriage. I slipped my phone into my palm and climbed 2 steps so I'd stand above the driveway. The testing sign lifted and slapped the jam once. I tapped record and kept the lens steady at chest height, the way we did on storm claims when tempers ran hotter than wires. The white Forester skidded, door half latched. Jay came hard across the yard, shoulders forward, words already aimed. He accused me of public shaming and of charging family for access to a house that, in his mind, should be a shared resource. I didn't answer the heat with heat. I pointed to the no trespass sign at the head of the drive and spoke to the camera as much as to him. "You are on my property." "I'm recording." He said I could record all I wanted, that he would cut contact if I kept acting like a landlord. "Meet in town, sign the guest agreement, no address registration," I said. "Those are the conditions." He threw a hand toward the sign, turned on his heel, and left the way he came, kicking gravel into a gray arc. Process takes adrenaline and gives it a job. I saved the video to cloud, emailed a copy to myself with a subject line that included the date, time, and location, and set the phone on the table. In the grid notebook, I wrote the minute of arrival, the content of his accusations, my 2 lines. his exit. No adjectives. I printed the state statute about criminal trespass in large type and mounted it under the sign so there would be no mystery about what the words meant if I had to point again. The porch rail had a bow I'd been meaning to correct. I set a level, marked the post, loosened the bracket, and pulled the rail back to plumb, one notch at a time, just enough to feel resistance ease. I wrote rail shimmed in the log. Small repairs bleed off shaking hands. By lunch, my pulse was steady again. 2 days later, the knock at the door carried no anger, just a practiced rhythm. A woman with a tablet and a county badge stood on the porch. She introduced herself and said Adult Protective Services had received a welfare report describing an isolated older adult, possible confusion, and unsafe behavior around wildlife and chemicals. I held the door, invited her in, and offered water. "Walk the place," I said. "I keep things where they can be found." We started in the kitchen. The pantry shelves were labeled in black tape: staples, canned goods, cleaning. The medication list inside the cabinet door showed 2 over-the-counter bottles and nothing else. The fridge hummed. The calendar on the wall named next week's Bear Safe session, the trust consult, the cognitive evaluation. She tapped her pen on the dates and copied them to her form. I did not fill the space with explanations. We sat at the long table facing the trees. I placed a neat stack of documents between us like tools on a drop cloth. Warden checklist on top, radon and septic orders under it, both with the no occupancy line highlighted. Printed screenshots from the neighborhood group showed Brooks' post, then my reply with attachments and the training registration. The appointment confirmation from Dr. Patel sat behind the trust intake packet from Caroline Holt. Last, I set down the access log, a simple spreadsheet of lock codes, start and stop times, and the notation guest code inactive. She read, not hurried, and asked standard questions in a voice that had done this many times. She asked about daily activities, and I gave the short version: cook, clean, split wood, drive to town as needed. Emergency plan, landline on the wall and cell on the charger by night. Ranger contact posted, neighbors' numbers in the binder. Social contact, a weekly breakfast in town, the upcoming training in my yard. I showed the doorbell camera hub and the cloud backup settings. "It's just how I've always run work," I said. "Logs keep things true." She noted Oriented X3, independent and home orderly on her tablet, and asked to photograph the no trespass sign and the calendar. I agreed. Paper wants witnesses as much as people do. She handed me a business card and a case number and said a letter would follow after review. I clipped the card under the desk phone and wrote the visit into the notebook, the way I did after a storm patrol: route, duration, findings. When the door closed, the house released a long breath I hadn't noticed it was holding. I washed the 2 glasses and put them back on the same shelf where they've stood since the first day. Late light slanted through the high glass and lay across the topo map, picking out the brook where the snowmelt ran. I stood on the porch and replayed the geometry of the confrontation: higher ground, clear voice, record first. Then the architecture of the visit: order visible at a glance, documents stacked to answer rumor, not to provoke it. None of that changed what family would try next. If a voice couldn't move the boundary and a welfare report couldn't stain the record, the next attack wouldn't knock. It would try to arrive folded and official-looking, with my name written in a hand that wasn't mine. The trees darkened one layer at a time. Somewhere out past the pines, a loon stitched evening to water. I wrote a last line for the day: prepared beats provoked. Then I closed the notebook and set it square to the table's edge, the way a lineman coils a rope and hangs it where the next pair of hands will find it. The email arrived just after sunup, a county e-recording alert with my name in the subject as if I'd sent it myself. I clicked it open and felt the floor settle under my boots. A quitclaim deed had been initiated electronically, grantor Walter Morgan, grantee blanked behind asterisks, status pending signature envelope. I read it twice, copied the transaction ID into the grid notebook, and let the pen rest on the page until my pulse matched the clock. I called Carolyn Holt from the porch because the air was cold enough to keep words crisp. I gave her the ID and the header string. She didn't waste comfort. Do not contact anyone. I'll request the audit log and notify the recorder to flag, she said. I wrote her sentence down verbatim so I wouldn't soften it later. When we hung up, I printed the alert and slid it into a fresh tab labeled forgery. The audit log hit my inbox an hour later, more granular than I expected. Device fingerprint, operating system, timestamps to the second, and an origin IP that reverse looked up to Jay's address in Portland. I took screenshots, PDF'd the whole chain, and printed 2 copies. The facts didn't shout. They just lay there like wrenches, heavy with their own use. Caroline's follow-up arrived a moment after, her letter to the recorder, language crisp, requesting the envelope be voided and the filer tagged for fraud review. I emailed the packet to myself, to Caroline, and to an offsite account I only use on bad days. I logged each action by time and verb, received, reviewed, saved, printed, reported, because a clean chronology does its own talking. Then I stood up and swept the table clear. Work puts the mind back in gear. I dialed Kennebec Mutual Credit Union and asked about their general process for charge-off portfolio sales in the next quarter. The rep explained cadence and privacy limits without names. I noted that accounts often move at quarter end, that buyers receive collection rights with compliance obligations, that debt can be acquired by an entity with an EIN. I wrote, "Monitor, do not deploy." My accountant answered on the second ring. By noon, he had filed articles for Northline Holdings, LLC, and forwarded the EIN confirmation. The document looked like any other receipt, which is what I wanted. Leverage should be quiet until it isn't. I placed the confirmation behind a tab called Options and closed the binder with both hands. Brooke texted after lunch, a single line asking if I'd seen the rumor about paperwork. I replied with a request to talk alone, neutral ground, mid-morning tomorrow. Not about blame, I wrote. About what comes next. She hesitated, then agreed to meet at the benches by the town green, a place that keeps conversations short because the wind moves through. I arrived early and chose a seat visible to the municipal camera dome on the lamppost. The birches around the green were still bare, their bark lifting in curls like paper. Brooke came with a coffee and sat without small talk, eyes set in the middle distance, as if the truth might stand there and introduce itself. I kept my folder face down. "I won't discuss posts," I said, "just 3 facts." She nodded once. I described the e-recording alert, the audit log that traced the envelope to Jay's IP, and the recorder's action to void and flag. I didn't slide papers across. It was enough that the proof existed and would travel if summoned. Her jaw worked once, then stopped. "What do you want?" she asked. The wind took the steam off our cups. 2 paths, I said. If you choose the lawful one, I'll help place your parents in a short-term rental now. I'll put down deposits, keep the Bear Safe session open to them, and hold the conservancy slots. But no address registration at my cabin, no keys without signed guest terms, and every visit finite. I let a beat pass. If the other path continues, pressure, forgery, end runs, I'll use every lawful tool I have. That includes civil and criminal remedies and, if necessary, becoming a creditor through a company I control. I don't want that. I will do that. She stared at the bandstand as if it might offer a different script. "Do you have places in mind?" It was the first useful question she'd asked me in weeks. I handed her a single sheet listing 3 rentals with rates and phone numbers, each one circled by someone I'd already called. She held the page with the tips of her gloves like it might be hot. "My parents didn't ask for this fight," she said, quiet enough that the wind almost carried it away. I know, I said, Vaditim. That's why they're on the lawful path by default if you take it. This is about lines, not punishment. We sat a moment and watched a truck angle into a loading zone. The camera dome reflected a small, warped version of us, 2 figures and a paper rectangle between them. I set the deadline because clocks make choices real. 3 business days, I said. By then, either you'll have rentals scheduled and a date for the bear-safe session, or I'll assume the other path and act accordingly. I stood and thanked her for coming. She didn't reach for the page again, but she didn't hand it back either. Back at the cabin, I recorded the meeting in the notebook. Location, duration, what I said, what she asked, the camera dome in view. I filed the forgery tab between trust and access and backed up the new scans to the offsite account. Then I stepped onto the porch and let the cold clear my head. The trees made their small winter sounds, clicks and whispers as the breeze moved through. Choice offered. Lights on. The woods didn't care which way she turned. The calendar would. The paper would. And so would I. The deadline passed at 9 a.m. without a call, a reservation email, or even a question. I wrote "deadline passed, no bookings" in the grid notebook and opened the first blinking subject line. The county recorder confirmed the quitclaim envelope had been voided and flagged. Any future attempt would require in-person verification with identification. I printed the notice, slid it under the forgery tab, and sent a 2-word reply to Caroline Holt. Received, filed. The cabin felt level again, not triumphant, just plumb. A second message arrived from the Attorney General's office, an inquiry about mail and benefits registering to my address. The subject line was dry, the request exact: please provide scans and describe occupancy. I laid the misaddressed envelopes on the table, photographed front, back, and postmark, and compiled a single PDF named Residency Evidence. I forwarded it through counsel and made a new divider labeled Residency. Paper likes its own room, and rooms like their doors shut. By noon, the lawn held 3 neat rows of folding chairs, and a portable bear-proof can lay open like a lesson. Ranger Grant Sawyer walked the neighbors through trash storage, grills, pet food, and spring movement, his checklist clipped to a board. A local TV van eased onto the gravel and set a tripod at the back edge of the half circle. I poured coffee for anyone who asked, and kept to the side so the ranger's voice could carry. The doorbell camera saw enough: a gloved hand tracing last year's claw marks on the white pine, a laminated sketch of food attractants taped to the lid of the can, the ranger's steady cadence he uses when explaining the woods to people who don't live in them yet. Neighbors asked practical questions. One man said, "We had a bear last spring." Ranger Sawyer nodded. "Then you know why this matters." Another asked about bird feeders and timing. He answered in plain language and handed out a 1-page sheet that boiled the woods down to what would fit in a pocket. The TV camera collected its minutes and moved on. I didn't speak for the segment. I didn't need to. The point wasn't me. That evening, the piece aired. The headline read, "New Resident Model Safety Best Practices," and my name sat beneath it with Greenville spelled right. I downloaded the clip, saved a copy to 2 drives, and printed a still frame for the binder with a date sticker. When I checked the neighborhood thread later, several comments under Brooks' post had softened into questions or corrections. I screenshotted those too, not for satisfaction, but because records tell the long story when memory edits itself. Morning brought clear wind and an appointment at Silver Birch Conservancy. Their office smelled like sap and old maps. I signed a letter of intent to grant a soft easement on the back acreage. Bird habitat, foot traffic by permit, no structures, protecting what I came here to sit beside. We initialed the map addendum, and the director handed me a thin folder on tax treatment and volunteer work days. She said, "Stewardship dates are flexible." I walked out lighter. Boundaries sharpen when the land carries its own rules on paper. By afternoon, a thin packet from Northline Holdings arrived in my inbox, the compliance bundle for a small, charged-off credit card portfolio I had authorized them to purchase. Jay's account sat inside it, numbers blacked out to all but the total and age. The template notices were studiously neutral, all rights reserved to counsel. I printed the confirmation and tucked it under Northline with a single note. Status, creditor, no contact outside counsel. Leverage isn't a speech, it's a file that waits. I texted Jay and asked to meet at the timberline. I chose a table under the camera dome and set a sealed envelope on the wood. He arrived late, eyes hollow from a week of poor sleep. He looked at the envelope and said, "What is this?" I slid it across and let the silence hold. "Take it to counsel," I said. 72 hours. He didn't open it. His hands shook, the way a man's do when the story he's been telling himself hits the curb. I didn't fill the space. Inside was the offer. Northline would forgive the balance and waive collection in exchange for 3 signatures, a waiver of claims to my property and trust, a written pledge of non-interference and no access without written invitation, and an acknowledgement that the e-signature attempt was wrongful and would not recur. No theatrics, just an exit. On my way back to the cabin, I sent Brooke a short text with 2 updated rentals at lower rates and a reminder about the Conservancy walk. "The slots are still yours," I wrote. "No pressure. Just options." The phone buzzed half an hour later with a 1-line reply I read twice before filing. "I'm listening." Reading isn't agreeing, but it isn't fighting either. It's a place to stand. The rest of the evening, I gathered the day into folders. Recorder's notice printed and stamped. A G inquiry filed with the envelope photos and the PDF TV segment saved to 2 drives and a still frame slipped behind a clear sleeve. Easement letter clipped to the map, a yellow tab at the edge so my hand would find it fast. Northline's confirmation 3-hole punched. Cafe meeting logged by time and place, camera noted in the margin. I wrote the weather because weather belongs to every day, and the temperature felt like a fact that didn't need anyone's permission. Dusk took a clean bite out of the ridge. I sat on the porch and watched the clearing drain of color, the chairs from the training still stacked by the shed, the bearcan latched and stowed. The cold set its hand on the boards and stayed. The next step would be repair if they wanted it. Rental keys, signatures, a training date for the Adlers, or enforcement if they didn't. Paper doesn't punish, it clarifies. I wrote the line in the notebook and underlined it once. Then I shut off the lamp, checked the deadbolt out of habit, and let the woods go about their own quiet business. Morning set the desk in order before I touched it. I printed Dr. Neha Patel's letter, competent, oriented, fit to manage my affairs, and slid it into a clear sleeve. The trust signing confirmation from Caroline Holt sat behind it, the notary sheet clipped to the top. On the wall calendar, I drew 3 orange blocks. Trust signing, rental move in, bear safe follow-up. In the grid notebook, I wrote an agenda at the top of the day's page, care plus clarity. I called Brooke for logistics only. No pass, no blame, just times and keys. We settled on a noon move-in for her parents at a short-stay rental near the library. "I'll meet you there with the lease," I said. She answered in the tone people use when they've decided to stop fighting the tide and swim across it. "We'll be there," she said. I logged the call and printed the month-to-month lease with the safety addendum, trash locked, food sealed, quiet hours, no address change. Before noon, I took Fred and Helen by the Silver Birch Conservancy boardwalk that skirts a cedar swamp. The planks were damp and smelled like clean rot. A chickadee rattled from a hemlock limb. Ranger Grant, off-duty but willing, walked a few paces ahead and pointed to sign most people miss. The bite on a sapling, the hair caught in rough bark at shoulder height, the clean edge of a track melting in shallow shade. He spoke low and even, Helen's shoulders lowered a half-inch at a time. Fred asked about bird feeders and seed types, and Ranger Grant gave him a number in pounds per week and a date to pull them in spring. I said little and let the air do the rest. The rental was small, bright, and honest. Baseboard heat ticked as it warmed. A laminated card on the counter listed Wi-Fi and trash day. We sat at the table and worked through the lease, each clause read with a pen on the margin. I highlighted the addendum in yellow and circled no domiciling or address changes. I paid the first month and deposit with a cashier's check and clipped the receipt to the copy that would live in my binder. Fred signed with a deliberate hand. He looked up once and said, "Thank you." I said, "You're welcome," and left the line alone so it could stand. Helen pressed her palm flat on the table as if to feel whether it belonged to her yet. Brooke watched, jaw unclenched, and gathered the keys. At the doorstep, I handed Brooke a printed guest agreement for future day visits to the cabin after weather and testing cooperated. I circled the lines about no address use, no key duplication, and time-limited entry. She nodded once and folded it into her bag. It wasn't victory. It was a door set on real hinges. Back at the cabin, 2 envelopes waited. Adult Protective Services closed the file. Unfounded, no action required. I filed the letter under APS and wrote the date in the notebook. The Attorney General's office acknowledged receipt of the residency evidence and said they might follow up. I slid that email into residency and added a clean line to the chronology so the path made sense later, even to a stranger. The rest of the afternoon, I built a packet meant to carry more care than pressure. On top, Dr. Patel's letter and the trust signing confirmation. Behind that, the rental lease copy with the paid receipt. Next, the guest agreement for day visits. Then offer letter V2, Northline's forgiveness of Jay's credit card balance and a commitment to forego civil action on the forgery attempt in exchange for 3 signatures. A property and trust waiver, a permanent non-interference agreement, and a 1-page correction to be posted in Greenville Neighbors acknowledging the testing context and linking to BearSafe resources. I added an optional memo. If signed, Northline would update his trade line to paid as agreed and close the account at $0. In the notebook margin, I wrote 3 arrows: pressure, arrow structure, arrow dignity. We met in a bank cubicle where the counter glass ran cool under the wrists. The notary had the unhurried patience of someone who has seen every kind of day. I set the packet down and let them read. Brooke lifted the correction and raised her eyebrows, surprised it wasn't sharp, just factual. The notary said, "Please sign here," and turned the page. Jay signed the waiver and the non-interference first, the pen chain clicking softly. He paused over the forbearance memo until Brooke nodded once. He signed, and the notary's stamp landed with the thud that ends a sentence. We left with copies that matched mine down to the tab color. On the way back, I stopped at the grocery with Fred and Helen. We bought locking cans and a roll of heavy bags. In the kitchen, I labeled bins, clipped the Ranger handout to the fridge, and wrote trash night and my number on a small laminated card I'd made that morning. The refrigerator hummed like a steady machine that knew its job. Helen stood at the window and said, almost to herself, "I think we'll sleep." Fred carried the cans out and latched them with a click you could hear from the door. Evening brought the kind of quiet you earn, not buy. I filed the notarized copies, trust confirmation and Dr. Patel's letter under trust, the lease under rental, the sign correction under social, the waiver and non-interference under Northland, the APS closure under APS. I set tomorrow's list, finalize beneficiary updates, confirm insurance riders, lay out the checklists for the trust signing. In the grid notebook, I wrote the day's last line and underlined it once. Care is a boundary that holds. On the porch, the air moved through the pines as if the trees were breathing for the hillside. For the first time since I set the coffee maker to catch the morning light, the calendar looked like a plan instead of a shield. The woods had not changed. I had. The same tools that kept breakers from tripping now held people where they could stand without falling, me included. Caroline Holt's conference room smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper. I sat at the oak table, read each page of the Revocable Living Trust one last time, and signed where the yellow flags told my pen to stop and thud under the notary's stamp. The trustee letter was concise, the instructions clear. Caroline handed me confirmations for the insurance writers and printed the beneficiary updates while the copier warmed the room with a low hum. I left with a tidy folder that felt less like a weapon than a floor. Back at the cabin, I filed the originals the way a lineman coils a rope, clean, labeled, ready for the next pair of hands. Bank beneficiaries, done. Insurance writers, done. Deed schedule, copied and slotted for the safe deposit box. I closed the binder rings with 2 clicks and wrote a single summary line in the grid notebook. Trust executed, coverage aligned, cabin protected. The topo map caught a bar of sun, the brook line bright as wire under clear sheath. By late morning, Brooks' correction went live on Greenville Neighbors. 3 sentences, factual, posted without commentary. Safety tests had required the house to be empty. A warden site review had occurred. Links provided to county radon guidance and bear-safe resources. I screenshotted the post with the timestamp and the first few measured comments that followed. I printed a copy for the social tab and did not reply. Corrections hold best when they stand without a hand on their back. An email from Northline arrived after lunch. The subject line read what I needed it to read. Balance forgiven, paid as agreed, update, submitted. The body confirmed the card at 0, the bureau update queued, and the account closed. I forwarded it to counsel and wrote closed under the Northline divider with the quiet satisfaction of a breaker set to on. Help is easier to recognize when it stops a fall instead of buying applause. The county recorder's final note followed. The fraudulent quitclaim matter was closed, the flag would remain. Any future deed filings involving my name would require in-person identification. I filed the notice under forgery and penciled a check mark in the margin. Rumor spent itself. Paper kept breathing. I looked around the room and felt the furniture belonged to itself again. In the afternoon, I drove by Fred and Helen's rental with fresh bin liners and extra batteries. Their labeled cans sat latched by the porch. Locks threaded, hinges oiled. The counter was clean. 2 new library cards fanned on the coffee table next to a regional bird guide. Helen said she was finally sleeping. Fred joked that chickadees were eating him into debt, then asked how much seed made sense before the thaw. We measured with a coffee mug and a number he could remember. Practical things soften worry at the edges. 2 days later, under the guest agreement, Brooke brought her parents for a short daylight visit. We kept to the clock and walked the perimeter at a steady pace. Ranger Sawyer drove by in his truck and lifted 2 fingers off the wheel, the acknowledgement of small towns where everybody eventually becomes ordinary again. I sent them home with a jar of coffee and the date for our next lawn session scribbled on an index card. They waved from the Subaru and the sign on my door did not need to speak. In town, the noise was down to paper and pens. At the church basement board, the bear-safe flyer sat under 2 pushpins next to a printout of the TV segment. No neon arrows, no red circles, just sheets that told the story without needing a throat. At the corner shop, a neighbor nodded once and pushed the door with a shoulder so I could step through. Courtesy does not ask for a statement, it just arrives and leaves the hinge cleaner. I met Brooke outside the grocer a day later. She said a quiet thank you without ornaments. Jay passed a step behind her, eyes on the sidewalk, no scene made. The distance held like a beam measured twice and cut once. That was enough. Boundaries do not demand friendship, they permit it to be optional. I carried a sack of flour and a box of filters back to the truck and let the moment go where it needed to go forward. Evening gathered itself on the ridge. I set the coffee maker for morning light, squared the notebook to the table's edge, and took stock in a final tally line. Trust executed, correction posted, debt forgiven, forgery closed, rental steady, guest terms normalized, cabin quiet. The wind moved through the pines with the same indifferent patience it had the day I arrived, but it sounded different to me now. Peace returned not as escape, but as work finished and put away where it could be found. I turned off the lamp, checked the deadbolt out of habit, and let the woods keep their watch. Morning laid a pale stripe across the topo map, the brook a bright thread under the sun. I ground coffee, set the mug beside the grid notebook, and titled a fresh page in block letters. What holds? The list wrote itself the way a line hums when it's tight. Clear rules, recorded facts, daylight over rumor, help separated from control, pressure applied only where the structure can take it. The testing sign, once flapped against the jamb, now lay flat in a closet. I liked knowing exactly where it was, useful, restful, silent. I checked the access log out of habit, guest codes inactive. The laminated card I'd made for the easement boundaries hung beside the map, clean font, arrows simple as a trail marker. The coffee cooled into a steady dark. Peace, I've learned, isn't a gift handed over. It's maintenance. Refill the bins, reset the timer, file the page, keep the hinges oiled so doors open and close without drama. Systems that once felt like armor now felt like a daily shirt. I walked to the Conservancy boardwalk before the day heated. Cedar shade kept a chill on the planks. The swamp aired out a clean, leaf-mold breath. I stopped at the hemlock where Ranger Grant once lifted a tuft of hair and found the same bark, the same patient roughness. No need to touch it to feel the lesson again. Living with the woods is letting what is there remain so, and adjusting your bin lids, your seed schedule, your expectations accordingly. Not conquest, not surrender, just the right distance. On the way back through town, I ducked into the church basement where the community board lives under pushpins and tape. I straightened the Bear Safe flyer, stapled a fresh corner, and tacked the date of next month's lawn session beneath the TV segment printout. Someone had posted a card for Free Dump Day Saturday with a small blue magnet in the shape of a fish. It made a tidy row: guidance, practice, service. None of it needed my initials to work. At the cabin, I opened the Greenville Neighbors page and saw a new thread from a woman asking what to do about a bear near her bins. Underneath, Brooke had left the county link and one sentence about testing windows and no occupancy rules, no adjectives, no heat. I took a screenshot and filed it in social, not to keep a score, but because records close circles better than memory. Then I closed the laptop and let that small, useful sentence stand without my hand on its back. There was an envelope on the porch rail when I stepped outside. No name, no stamp, just my address written in blue ink. Inside lay the printed guest code sheet I had created months ago for a temporary window, the code crossed out with a single line and initialed J, no note, no demand. The paper made a flat sound when I tapped it against my palm. I slid it into the access folder and wrote one word on the tab: acknowledged. Some repairs are small enough to keep. I cleared the table and wiped the wood with a damp cloth until the grain came up. Then I wrote the final lines on the page I'd titled at dawn, lines that read more like instructions than philosophy. Start with paper. Keep it public. Offer help that doesn't cost your home. When pressure is required, make it lawful and small. Leave room for people to walk back. Review your own work with the same courtesy you demand from others. Sign only what you can explain. In the afternoon, I walked the perimeter and counted the quiet decisions that had become invisible: the latch that now clicks, the bin that now stays closed, the guest code that doesn't exist, the easement line that tells the chainsaw where not to go. I stacked a short row of dry wood for a mild night and set a second rocking chair square to the rail, a habit that says I expect company even if no one comes. Preparation is a way to be kind to your future self. Toward evening, a raven crossed the clearing with a slow scissors of wings, cut a dark punctuation mark across all that sky, and went on. I poured one last cup and sat with the map. The cabin felt like itself again, not a position to defend, just a place where work had been done and put away where the next pair of hands, including mine, could find it. Rumor had thinned into flyers and schedules and an index card on a church board. The forest had not changed its mind about anything. I had changed mine about how to live beside it. Before going in, I set the notebook square to the table's edge and read the morning's list once more. It did not feel like a victory speech. It felt like a maintenance log that anyone could follow. I clicked the deadbolt, not to keep the world out, but to finish the routine that tells the day it's complete. The wood said nothing, which is the point. Quiet, maintained, is its own message. Peace doesn't arrive as a trophy at the end of a battle. It arrives as a routine you can live with. It's the hum of a home that finally remembers itself, the weight of a door that closes cleanly, the quiet agreement between a person and a place. After storms of opinion and paper, what endures is not the noise but the structure that holds, clear rules, honest records, and help offered without strings. We learn, sometimes the hard way, that boundaries are not walls against the world. They're thresholds that tell the world how to enter, respectfully, briefly, and with purpose. Order is not cold, it's compassionate. When we put the truth on paper and keep it in daylight, we're not being severe. We're giving everyone something sturdy to lean on. Promises spoken in anger evaporate, signatures and timestamps remain. And when the dust settles, the simplest facts speak loudest. What the land can carry, what a household can sustain, what a heart can give without breaking. Stewardship of home, of relationships, of one's own capacity is quiet labor, rarely applauded, often misunderstood. But it is the kind of work that lets people breathe again. Forgiveness, too, sits in this architecture. It does not erase harm, nor does it pretend consequences don't matter. Forgiveness acknowledges the ledger and then chooses a path forward that does not mortgage tomorrow to pay for yesterday. It writes in clear ink what will and will not continue. In that clarity, dignity returns, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once, like the first steady night of sleep after months of strain. Community carries a role in this because rumor is only strong until it meets daylight. When facts are posted where everyone can see them, the temperature drops. Good neighbors aren't the loudest voices. They're the steady ones who point to the notice on the board, the date on the calendar, the link that explains the rule. In the long run, public truth is a mercy. It protects those who follow the rules and gives those who stumble a straightforward way to stand up again. There's a lesson, finally, about scale. Life doesn't have to be decided in courts of opinion or rooms where shouting wins. It can be decided in small decisions tended each day, the bin that stays latched, the code that stays inactive, the schedule that stays humane. Peace is not passive, it is maintained. It asks for patience with processes, for a willingness to be exact without being cruel, for the courage to say no so that yes can mean something. Boundaries, truth, repair, this is the grammar of a life that lasts. If you're arriving at the end of this journey carrying your own questions about family, trust, or starting over, consider this. Begin with the page. Write down what matters. Name what you can and cannot give. Offer help that doesn't cost your home. And if pressure must be applied, make it lawful, proportionate, and brief. Leave a path for people to walk back and a chair on the porch for the day they do. You might find, as many do, that calm isn't found at the edge of the world. It's built at the edge of your table, one documented kindness at a time. Thank you for sharing your time here. We'd love to hear what stayed with you. Was it a line, a moment, a small practice you plan to try? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Your reflections help others find their footing too. If this story resonated, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you'll never miss the next tale of resilience and renewal. Until then, take a breath, set your own boundaries with care, and may your next quiet evening feel earned.